Hi, Doug. How are you?
I'm doing very well, Mary. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. How's your day so far?
So far, so good. Working hard, a little bit busy, but that's always good.
Okay, that's good to hear. So, for the people already tuned in, let's just start.
Fantastic.
Okay, great. So, hi, everybody. My name is Mirit Hoffman. I'm an elder law lawyer and a gerontologist, and my focus is mainly helping senior citizens when they reach significant junctions in their life, talking about estate planning, which is basically wills and enduring power of attorneys or guardianship, also prenups or financial agreements for people in their second or third relationship, and also advising on trust and estate issues for people who are dual citizenship, US and Israel. And from my exposure with this age group of senior citizens, I found that there are a lot of other topics which are very important that are not necessarily discussed or not discussed as much. And therefore, I've had for over 2 years now, so 2 years now, I've been hosting this sort of talk session or podcast, however you want to call it, with other people, other professionals who advise senior citizens on important issues that everybody really should know. And today we're going to be talking to, it's really my honor to talk to Douglas Goldstein about cross-border investment planning. So Doug, please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. It's funny the way you introduced yourself, Mary, is one of the things I find that when I talk to clients is they always think that like I do what you do and you do what I do. Every time you talk about things like retirement and estate planning, we all get kind of mushed together. So the important thing to remember is that there is the legal side, there is the accounting side, and I don't do either of those. I deal on the investment side. And specifically, I work with people who live in Israel who have US investment accounts. So about 30 years ago, I started Profile Investments. And I was in a very lucky position that I got to do exactly the same thing here in Israel that I did when I worked on Wall Street. I actually literally worked in the Twin Towers. Zichronam Levracha, they should rest in peace. And for me, obviously, therefore, Aliyah was a very good move. And to this day, I still work with people who have U.S. investment accounts, but the client base that I mostly talk with are usually people who are nearing retirement or retired and often well into their retirement, and to help them handle their investments in the States. But certainly what comes up a lot are the estate planning issues, as well as just making sure they'll have enough money to pay the bills for the rest of their life.
Wonderful. And that actually leads me to my first question. What are the biggest financial mistakes that you find with when you see people when they reach retirement age regarding, and how can they avoid them regarding financials, obviously?
Yeah. So I think one of the big mistakes people make is um, there, there's uh, there's a whole study of what they call behavioral finance, and in fact, an Israeli won the Nobel Prize in this not so long ago. Daniel Kahneman, Zichrono Livracha, may he rest in peace. Danny Kahneman won, even though he wasn't an economist, he won the Nobel Prize in economics by talking about some of the traits that people have that make them do just the worst things they could possibly do for themselves in terms of handling their money. And one of them that we see is overconfidence. So now maybe some people out there are saying, wait a second, that's the exact opposite of me. I'm underconfident. I simply am so afraid of dealing with my own money. And we see that a lot and we talk to people about that. But one of the problems is people often feel that, well, I know what I'm doing. Or a lot of times we'll see in a couple that one of the spouses feels very confident that he knows what he's doing. And I'm using the word he because it's usually the way it goes. Whereas on the other side, she doesn't feel so confident and she lets him handle everything. And I'll just tell you a story of something that happened. We had a woman. She came in, and she really had no self confidence in handling money, and quite frankly, it was justified because she had no experience handling money because her husband had been handling it his whole life until he died 20 years earlier. And between then and now, she had never felt that she could do anything. She never made any changes in the portfolio. And in fact, she had a portfolio that was all in about four stocks. So I said it was a lot of money, but it was all in four stocks. So I started the conversation, not talking about the stocks, but just talking in general. What are your goals? And she said, listen, I've been a widow for 20 years and it's getting hard for me. And I'm thinking I'd like to move into a senior residence. I said, okay. And how are you going to pay for that? She said, well, I'm going to use this portfolio. I said, well, when are you planning to move in? She said, well, there are things going on probably in about a year. So I said, well, what would happen if these stocks would go down in value between now and then? How would you pay for it? And she said, well, my husband was a very, very astute investor and he really knew what he was doing. And, I know I can count on these stocks. And I nicely said, I said, but, your husband passed away 20 years ago. Things have changed since then. And she said, what do you mean? I said, well, the markets have changed. The economy has changed. What's big these days is very different from what was big 20 years ago. And you realize that between now and a year from now, which is a very short term in financial planner speak, anything could happen. And then you literally might not be able to make this move that not only do you want to make, but that you need to make. So on the one hand, her husband had been overconfident and she was so dependent on what he had said decades earlier. And she completely had no confidence that she couldn't even manage to make any changes herself. That this is a real, behavioral finance conundrum that can really hurt people.
It's funny that you say that because it's also something that I see as well when I discuss wills. When especially if one is dealing with the finances and the other one, usually, as you said, it's usually the husband dealing with and the wife has no idea where anything is. And one of the first things I always suggest is make a list and put it in somewhere that she can know where it is also, and put in exactly what you guys have. So in the case, God forbid, you pass away, she knows what she has and how to deal with it and who are the contact people even that you had dealt with that you're dealing with, and make sure that it's updated, because those are so important. That's such an important thing. So right.
Do you ever get, so one of the things that happens a lot is, again, usually the man calls me and he talks to me about the money and we talk about investing. And I like talking about investments. It's my thing. And then he begins to want to make decisions. So I often say, listen, the day-to-day operations, buy this, so that, if that's your thing and you want to do that with me, that's great. But the big picture stuff, you got to bring your wife into the meeting, into the call, into the Zoom, something like that. Does that happen also with writing wills and powers of attorney? Or in that case, do people understand that both spouses' opinions are important?
Oh, I make it very clear that both spouses' opinions are very important. But I think, I may had one or two of those clients that said, "Oh, I'll just decide and we'll have, the same will." And I said, "No, no, no, no. We're both going to sit with me. We're all going to sit together and make that decision." But yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned that.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a real problem.
What about, things that happen unexpectedly, like medical emergencies or sudden changes in living arrangements? How can people be prepared for that?
So what you've probably heard people talk about is everyone should have an emergency fund, and I'm no different from it. Probably, hopefully, every financial planner on the planet who says, "Listen, you should have 3 to 6 months worth of spending easily available," and that doesn't mean, "Oh, well, we own a rental apartment and we could always sell that," because as a lawyer, you can't always sell it and things happen. And it doesn't mean, "Oh, well, I could just take money out of this fund or that retirement account, or I'll sell these stocks because." In 2008, when the market crashed, things really froze up and people did not have money, easy access to their money. So we talk a lot about literally keeping money in the bank or in a money market fund. A money market fund is it's an American brokerage term. It's pretty much like your open account, but it pays usually some dividends along the way. So people like them because they're earning some money even on the liquid money, but they're not getting rich on it. They're not earning a lot of money on it. And the biggest complaint that people have is they say, "Yeah, Doug, why would I put my money and get X% in the money market or in a bank account or a checking account, which pays even less, when I could just invest it with you? Because, I know, Doug, that you can make us more money." And I always say, first of all, there are no guarantees. And in my world, there are no guarantees. Anyone who's in the financial world who gives you guarantees, you got to really wonder about it. Everything has some risk. You just have to understand what the risk is that you're confronting. So to answer your question, liquidity risk is a huge issue because when you need money in the event of an emergency, you need to have it now. And everything costs money. So even liquidity costs money. If you want to have money that's always available to you, it means that it's not going to earn money in some other investment. You can't use that to buy an apartment and collect rent. That's the cost of liquidity. And that's okay. You're paying for a service. The service you're paying for is peace of mind. So, a lot of times when I talk to people, I can see that they've been reading the internet, they've been reading newspapers, or worst of all, they've been listening to the guy next to them in shul give them some advice, and they're in such a panic. And that's a terrible thing. What you need to do is you need to lower the stress And the best way to lower stress is to know that you always have some money on hand. And for each person, it's going to be different, the amount of money, but that's something you work out in your financial plan.
I think that's really excellent advice, really. I get also this question I get a lot from clients who I deal with. How can people live effectively in Israel and access money held in their American accounts? And I have, for instance, I have a lot of my clients that, made Aliyah in their 60s or 70s. Most of their financial accounts are in America, and they have this one checking account in Israel, which they transfer money just for living expenses.
So first of all, I think it's a great system. It works fine. Frank, that's most of our clients. Most of our clients are people who made Aliyah. The joke we make is that they've dedicated their lives to Israel, but not their money. So they have a brokerage account. They consolidate things. The best thing really to do when you make Aliyah is just, I mean, probably even before you make Aliyah, is consolidate your assets. Don't have 4 different brokerage accounts and IRAs at 3 different companies and a bank account and 7 checking credit cards. If you're all over the place, first off, it's just hard to deal with anyway. It's even more hard to deal with when you're overseas, when you live in Israel. It's even worse if, God forbid, something happens to you and your spouse has to take care of it. And then top that off with, heaven forfend, you should pass away and your kids have to unwind all this. That's where they end up spending a lot of money on legal fees or going to America or not having access to money literally for years because you didn't consolidate. So I think, first of all, the best thing for people to do is just to put the money into one brokerage account, one IRA account. Keep it simple. All the brokerage accounts, all the brokerage companies that I know of, including ours, will insure your portfolio for the full value of the portfolio. So you don't have to worry, oh, I got to divide it up in different places. Or if you buy CDs, if you like FDIC insurance on your certificates of deposit, your US bank accounts, you don't have to go, and if you have more than $250,000, you don't literally have to go to 4 or 5 or 7 or 10 different banks and open accounts. You can do all of that within the framework of one brokerage firm, and you can own many different bank deposits, and each one of them is fully and separately insured. So let's take that off the table, that fear of consolidation. It should be the opposite, that you should have fear of being scattered and not knowing what you have. Once you do that, then if you're new at Aliyah, if you just came, you may not know how much you're spending, but usually people who are here a year or 2 or 3 or more, they get the sense of how much money they need to bring over every year from America. We have clients, they'll bring over 10 or 20 or $50,000 a year, let's say. Normally we'll wire it over twice a year, just what they need. And then they live on that for the year, and they keep an eye on their expenses, and we talk about it. And then when they need more money, they can bring it over. Alternatively, they might use we can give them a Visa card, or they'll use their credit card from the States or a checking account. It should be relatively easy to access your money.
Very good. I'll just add, if you don't mind, that as people get older, they might need to transfer more money to Israel because they might need, more, they might have more expenses.
Yeah, I think that's true. And again, your emergency fund should be nearby. You might have some of your emergency fund in shekels in Israel, and some of it might be in the US, but the important thing is just to have one.
Very good. What do you recommend for individuals living in Israel for a smooth transfer of their US assets to their heirs?
So I'm going to skip over all the legal side of it because I know that's what you talk about a lot. But I will talk technically a couple of things. One of them is, first of all, make sure you have a will. If you don't have a will, go write it right now. Call me right now, because you have to have the will. Otherwise, it's not clear what happens. Sorry, I take it back. It is clear what happens. What will happen is whatever the law says is going to happen, and there's a good chance you don't want that to happen. And in fact, let's just tell us, what happens if someone dies and doesn't have a will? What's the basic rule about that?
Okay, so if somebody dies in Israel and doesn't have a will, the basic rule is that half of his estate will go to his wife and half of his estate will go to his children. So just as an example, let's say a house. They bought a house in Israel. It's already registered 50-50. Usually it's already registered 50-50 on each of them. So if let's say he passes away first, his 50% will get divided to 25 to her, to the remaining spouse, and 25 divided between the children. And that is not usually an ideal situation, meaning if she wants to sell the house because she wants to downsize, or even if she wants to be moved to an institution or whatever, what's it called? Dior
I'm
Mugan,
sure.
whatever the
Nursing care facility,
nursing care
Guillermo
facility,
Mugan, right?
thank you. She will need to get the children's request. And afterwards, if she sells, she'll need to give them their share of their inheritance. Not everybody's so happy to do that, especially since, life expectancy is so much longer these days. People can live longer lives. They might need more money. They might need that asset. And the last thing that people usually want to do is start asking their children.
Right. I think this 50-50 model, half to your spouse, half to your kids, is a little bizarre. We actually had a case, a woman called me and she lived in a fairly expensive house. And she was young and her children were minors. They were under 18 and her husband had sadly passed away. And she was stuck in the same situation. I said, well, you could sell the house. And she goes, how do I even get the permission of a minor child to sell the house? I mean, talk about legal issues
So
and all the
that
trouble.
is a whole different ballgame, because when you have minors, you need to get the court's consent. So it's not enough that you're the guardian of those children, because the court wants to make sure that you don't have a conflict of interest. Even though you're the parent, you still need to get the court's consent, and that makes it even more difficult. So not enough
Right.
that she has to deal with her children on her own, she has to now go to court and get the court's consent to sell the house that she owns.
Right. And this is not theoretical. We really dealt with a case like that. And of course, what would have solved that is if they had written wills, like,
Absolutely.
appropriately. So yeah, to answer your question, what is the way for people to make sure that their heirs will be properly taken care of? It's the very first thing is a will. Now, in certain situations, it might be appropriate to have a trust document, and I guess I'll beyond the scope of our discussion today, but your lawyer should be able to advise you which is most appropriate given your situation. Sometimes you may have both a will and a trust. There are all sorts of situations like that. But another very important way of passing money to your heirs is through your retirement accounts or your insurance policies, and that goes by beneficiary. That circumvents the will. If you have an IRA account in America, an individual retirement account, or a 401k, or a life insurance policy, or an annuity, or parallel products in Israel, when you set up that account, you literally tell the company, if I die, the money should go to my wife, or if she's already passed away, then it should get divided amongst my children. These are ways that you can indicate what should happen, and it doesn't go through the will. It doesn't go through probate. So it's not even a big deal as long as you've taken care of it. But the thing is to take care of it and every so often to update it. In my business, we have a requirement. The Israeli Securities Authority requires that every year we have to update our client information. So one of the things I'll look at with clients is I'll remind them who they designated in their IRA account to get to be the beneficiary. And frankly, normally it doesn't change, but every so often something comes up. Sometimes people are dealing with grandchildren or disabled children, and they set something up years ago. And since then, they've set up a special needs trust. And now the first thing they set up doesn't apply. They don't even remember that they set up the documentation that way. So I remind them, and then they go, "Oh yeah, Doug, thank you for the reminder. It's time we update that document." And when you update a beneficiary document with your U.S. advisor, it literally takes about 1 minute. You just say who the new people are, you sign a form, and you're done. And then you can feel stress-free that your wishes will actually be carried out.
Very good, important points. Yes. What about the challenges facing people who have to deal with their financial accounts from Israel? Meaning their financial accounts in the US, do they have challenges? Can you talk to us a little bit about those?
So the biggest challenge that we've seen with people handling their portfolios in the States is that the US brokerage firms or banks don't really want to work with people overseas. So I'll tell you the background of this. It's not that they don't want the clients, although you would think so. Just for example, a few years ago, Wells Fargo closed down $40 billion worth of client assets overseas. Just they sent them a letter and said, we are no longer working with people overseas, and go find someplace else. Now, I have to say this was, of course, great for me because I got calls all day, hi, Doug, I've seen your articles in the Jerusalem Post where you talk about people being kicked out of their brokerage firm. And I said it could never happen with me because I've been with Wells Fargo for 30 years. But all of a sudden, they gave me 90 days to close out my account. Can you believe it? And I said, yeah, hold on. I'm talking to a guy on the other line who's telling me the same story, things like that. And around the same time, I think JP Morgan closed down 50,000 accounts of retail clients who lived outside the United States. all of this came about after 9/11 because the US passed what was called the Patriot Act, which was designed to stop funding of terrorist organizations. And they figured, we'll just make really, really strict rules about moving money outside the United States, and we'll make the banks and the brokerage firms responsible for overseeing that our rules are followed. And not only that, they put such teeth in this law. They said that if an American firm, let's say, is complicit, even accidentally, but they should have known, if they're complicit in allowing terrorist money to move through their institution, they're going to be criminally responsible. So you may say, well, that sounds reasonable. They shouldn't be allowing terrorists to move money. But let's say you're a big bank, right? And you're moving billions of dollars a year of client money here and there and here and all the time. You know, frankly, it's just hard to know everyone who's your client. And now imagine someone in the Middle East. And for those of you who may not be aware, Israel's in the Middle East, but you're some guy in New York and you can't find Israel on a map. And as soon as you hear the Middle East, boy, are you thinking bad things. And you're saying, we have 5,000 clients in the Middle East. Forget it. Let's just close those accounts down. And that's what they do. They don't want the risk because they don't know what they're doing overseas. And so it's easier for them to close down the accounts than to try and figure out how to make sure that they're being fully compliant with the Patriot Act. And you compare that with a company who literally has boots on the ground, right? I literally sit in Israel. I'm licensed by the Israeli Securities Authority to do what I do. So when one of my clients wants to wire money from his U.S. account to his bank account in Israel to buy a house, I sign off on that wire, and I sign off because I know the client and I feel comfortable doing that. It's not the guy in New York has to say, gee, I don't know who this person is. So that's really why some firms are not willing or not able or just very nervous about doing business outside the United States, and why some firms are able to handle clients who live outside the US.
Okay. Let's go to something a little bit different. How do you help clients balance, the desire to support children and grandchildren, and on the other hand, deal with their own retirement needs? There might be, sometimes a clash between those two.
Oh yeah, there's often a clash between those two. You know what they say on the airplane, right? When if there's an emergency and the oxygen masks fall,
Yeah.
right? Put your own mask on first before you help your children. Same thing applies here. Sometimes people don't quite recognize the issue. So I think the most extreme case I had of this was a client who was just very, very bad at math. And they inherited $250,000. And they came in and they said, Doug, we got all this money. To them, this was like the be all and end all. They'd never imagined so much money. They said, we got $250,000. I said, okay, what are your goals? They said, well, this will be a good nest egg for us for retirement. He said, but first, we just want to help. We have 5 sons, and we'd like to help them buy an apartment. So we were thinking we would give each one of them $50,000. And then with the rest, we'd like you to make our retirement happen. So I said, you got $250,000. I said, that's $250,000. And you have 5 sons, right? And they said, yeah. And they said, we want to give each one $50,000. This was a very hard conversation. So I took out my calculator and I said, 250,000 divided by 5. And I showed them, I said, that's all the money. And you could see the wind just came out of their sails. It just, again, not being very good at math, but I think the story illustrates something very important, which is you need to first take care of yourself. I'm a huge fan of helping your kids. We help our kids. However, we do it in a way that certainly is not going to threaten our own financial security in the future. That's number one. But number two is you have to make sure that you're not threatening your children's own financial security. And by that, I mean, you want to make sure that you're not messing up their view of money. Because I had a client, I'm sure just like you, I deal with a lot of times the grandparents and then the parents and then the grown-up children, right? I deal with multiple generations. So I'm aware of everyone's financial situation, although I'm not allowed to talk between the generations about what's going on. That's something that we keep confidential, but I do know what's happening. And, a lot of times I'll see that the parents or the grandparents are gifting and gifting and gifting. And I'm watching the ultimately recipients begin to, I don't want to use the word spoiled, but just begin to have no real concept of money. And, they may be, in the beginning, they might have received, 10,000 shekels a year. That was a very nice gift. And now they're getting 10,000 shekels a month. And the parents are saying, well, it's not enough to live on. But meanwhile, they've completely destroyed the incentive of these kids to work hard. And it's really, I think it really does damage to them. And I see this happening. So you have to be very, very careful. It's good if there's someone on the outside, maybe you can tap you on the shoulder and say, wait a second, maybe that's a little bit too much. And maybe we have to find a balance. But it helps, to make sure if you can't do it yourself and you're feeling it's difficult to say no, one of the other things I often tell people is whenever your kids ask for money, tell them, oh, I have to ask Doug Goldstein just to make sure that it's okay. And then they just call me and say, Doug, the answer is no, right? And I say, yeah, the answer is no. Because they want to say no. But they don't want to say, they need someone they can lean on to say no. So I think it's important to realize there's time to give and times not to give.
I can so resonate with that. When I prepare the enduring power of attorney documents, one of the questions that always come up is, do you want to gift your children when you're no longer able through this document? And depending, of course, on their financial situation, I always am very hesitant when they say yes, and then they give me this, really a lot of money, and I want to give, when their birthdays and their bar mitzvahs and the wedding and this and that. I'm like, hang on, because you don't know how much, first of all, you don't know how much money you're going to need. You don't know how long you're going to live in this situation where you're going to need a lot more money that you may need now. And the last thing you want to do is to be dependent on your children afterwards because you've gifted them everything. So it's a very, there's a balance to be said about that. So I really, really resonate with what you said. We have time for one more question. So this is a good one regarding strategies that you recommend for elder clients when they feel overwhelmed with their financial situation. What can you tell them?
Yeah. So I think that the first thing is to realize that a lot of times people feel overwhelmed, not because they don't have enough money and not because they're not experts in finance, because again, maybe I'm like a little bubble, but most people make it through retirement. The people that I talk to, eventually they make it through. And most people don't know a lot about investing. That's just the nature of it, right? There are people who know more and people who know less. But that being said, it turns out that there are people who know a huge amount of investing who also go broke. And I mean, you can look at the stories of hedge fund managers who end up deeply in debt because even though they're super smart, they blew it. I think that in order to really make sure you'll be safe in your retirement and to live a stress-free retirement, it'll just help to have a basic plan. And the basic plan doesn't need to be how you're going to buy and sell and trade and invest. That's something you can outsource to an investment advisor. The thing that you need to look at is how much you're spending, right? That's the number one thing I'll always ask people, what does it cost you to live every month? And if you don't know, just gather that data. Because if you don't have that data, a lot of times I'll speak to someone and they say, when I ask them, how much money do you spend? They'll say, I don't know, maybe, 15, maybe 20, maybe 25,000 shekels a month. And I say to them, do you realize there's a huge difference between 15,000 and 25,000 shekels a month? That's $120,000 shekels a year difference, right? That's huge. So let's begin to just get a little information that we have to see what you're spending. And sometimes they'll say, I have no idea. And they don't even want to do the work to figure it out, which I understand, but sometimes I'll cajole them or we'll help them, guide them how to do that. Another way to figure it out is just to say, well, how much money do you earn? Because usually there are fewer sources of income than there are places where you're spending, right? You may spend money 100 times a month, but you only get money in 3 times a month. You get your Social Security, your pension, and your bituach leumi. So then I'll ask them, how much does that total? And hopefully they know, not always. Sometimes we have to work on that. So then they know how much they earn. And then I say, well, are you in positive or negative in the bank? And all of a sudden, that's like an eye opener because if they're in positive and they stay in positive generally, it means that they're earning more money usually than they're spending. So that's good. And if they're constantly in negative and they're bringing money over from America to make up for it, then we look at their yearly statement from their American brokerage firm and we see how much money did they take out over the course of the year. And if it was $4,000 on $1 million portfolio, no problem. But if it was $87,000 on $1 million portfolio, then maybe we have to talk a little bit about how much they're bringing over. So there are tools and tricks that we can do to figure out whether you're generally above water or generally below water. And just knowing that is going to help you to feel a lot more safe about your portfolio. And even if you are underwater sometimes or all the time, then at least we know what we're working with and how to design the portfolio to make sense for who you are and what you need. That's the first step. That's very much a discussion about you and your lifestyle. You notice we're not talking at all about the investments per se. Again, the investments are something that you don't have to be an expert in. I spend a lot of time teaching about it because I like talking about it. And as much patience as people have to listen to me teach about the investments, I'm happy to do that. But once I can see that their eyes are kind of glazing over, usually I'll give a suggestion for how they can set up their portfolio to meet their needs, and then they feel much more relaxed about doing that. But step by step, look at how much you're spending, how much you're earning, and then begin to work on the portfolio.
It's very good. It's very good advice. Okay, well, thank you so much for being with me. It was a super important conversation, and thank you everybody for being here. And hope to see you in my next podcast. So goodbye for now.
Mary, thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you.